somebody stood up at one of them and said, with a jar, you know, the old-fashioned jars
Yes.
of baby food, and said, I can't believe this. This food is older than my baby. That was a penny drop moment, you know, because it had such a long shelf life. It was older than, the shelf life was longer than her baby was. And we kind of thought, it's all about freshness, it's all about a whole bunch of things, but it's all about what little dish is going to convey to the consumer. And that is priceless. Understanding that consumer drive and consumer need is priceless.
John, thank you for coming on my show, the Mike Saraswat Show. So excited to speak to you. Always been a fan of, FMCG category. Ages ago, I wanted to start my own thing within the space, but never had the courage or the understanding. It always looked so difficult to scale. But you're the master of doing all of that. So I'm super excited to have you with me. If we could start off by a little bit of your introduction of who you are and what you have done in the past.
Sure, Mike, thanks so much for having me along. I guess I'm the food guy. That's what people probably know me as. I've set up 3 different businesses over the first 30 years of my 35 years in business. New Covent Garden Soup Company was the very first one in the UK.
Love it.
Set that up in 1987. And then sold that in 1998. And then went to the States and did something quite similar, but also very different, which was fresh soup in a carton for the US market. Took that to the States. I came back from the States after 5 years there, and a few years after that set up my 3rd business, which was Little Dish. Little Dish is all about tasty, convenient, good quality meals for young kids, and subsequently snacks for young kids as well. So they're the kind of 3 businesses that I set up, co-founded, grew, and subsequently exited from in the first 30 years. And since then, I've been probably helping a lot of startups and early stage growth businesses, typically in the food and drink space, not exclusively, but mostly. A lot of them in the UK, some in Dublin. I live in Germany, so some here as well. So these days I do less in terms of executive involvement. I'm mostly a non-executive. I follow the investments I make. So I sit on the board and hopefully provide value added to businesses in their early stages and hopefully de-risk their growth so that they don't make the same mistakes I did, and advise them on how to develop their brands, typically grow their business, and hopefully take it to exit.
Wow, this is incredible. If somebody is watching this as an entrepreneur or as a leader, I think there's a lot of learning in the next sort of 20 to 30 minutes that we'll be speaking. I'm super pumped. I'm super excited about this because especially you doing what you did, here in the UK, and then you taking those learnings in the US, it's very hard. The markets are very different. And that kind of brings me to my first question of how do you, before you even started all of this, right? How did you define personally what success meant to you?
It's a really interesting question. You know, success and failure, they're 2 sides of the same coin, I think. And of course, when I did my first business, New Covent Garden, I was just out of university. So it's not that I had a big plan that I had lots of steps in that I was going to implement. Kind of made it up as I went along. But, success and failure, I think, defined by not reaching your goals, depending on what sort of goals you've got or how far you fall short of them. I think there can be a thin line between success and failure a lot of the time as well. But I think the big difference between the two is that you can more easily learn from failure. And make no mistake, Mike, I don't think you can make a career out of failure. But allowing yourself to fail brings huge benefits. Yeah, I mean, success is a lousy teacher. I've heard that one so many times, and it's so true. Because you often don't really know what's causing the success that you're going through. You're often pulling lots of levers at the same time in order to make something work. Failure, on the contrary, is much more transparent. As an entrepreneur, when you fail, you're often left very exposed. And the big thing I've noticed about failure is that it hurts like hell. And, it's not a great place to be, but it's a good place to have been. And it makes you want to never be there again. And that can be really effective learning curve.
That's interesting.
If you take the time, you can learn a lot about, business, about your industry, about yourself, which is probably more important. And for many large companies, I think, it's a problem because they're, being fearful of failure results in action being avoided because they're trying to ensure failure is avoided. For entrepreneurs, on the other hand, past errors are kind of like a badge of honor. And a New Covent Garden Soup Company, a Little Dish, we made lots of mistakes. Luckily, none of them were terminal, but very many of them were the making of us. So, so that was a lesson learned.
That's interesting. I think you touched upon two very interesting points that, I remember in my early 20s, I always wanted to set up a media business, had no understanding of it, didn't understand how media dynamics really work. I think they're well, far better understood in the States than here in the UK for some reason. Here we are more sort of around the quality of content, which is great. But it's interesting you say that, because if I would have done something big in my university days, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. Now I am always careful about what I do, because I've got those set of failures along the line or learnings from other people, and I'm more risk averse. Did you feel doing something when you were really young was, a clever way of not actually looking at the problem itself because you were unaware of it and you just carried on, and that in a way was your reason for success?
That's so true. I mean, I often say that ignorance is bliss, and it really is in so many ways. It certainly is from a business perspective. Like I mentioned at the outset, I set up New Covent Garden Soup Company with my business partner in 1987. I was just out of university. So I didn't know anything about anything. Certainly didn't know anything about food or the food industry or even business or what it all meant. And could hardly spell the word entrepreneur, frankly. But we were naive. We were a bunch of happy amateurs. It was a huge adventure for us. We had a huge time, a very enjoyable time, a huge adventure going through the whole experience. But I often think back and say, if I had known then what I know now, would I have even tried it? I think sometimes you look at the mountain that you're about to climb, if you know how big the mountain is, and you think, you know what, I'm going to leave this for somebody who knows more than I do, or somebody who knows what they're talking about, or somebody who maybe has done it before. But if you don't really know, you got that sense of naivety, you crack on, don't you? And you're very easily at least halfway up the mountain before you realize how big that mountain is and how much more there is to go. But of course, you don't come clambering back down. You just keep on going. And I think that ignorance is bliss was one of our saving graces, if you like, at New Covent Garden, because we took on a huge amount and we ended up with a huge tiger by the tail. In fact, again, all this was with a huge amount of healthy retrospect.
Let's dig a bit deeper into as a case study of New Covent Garden Soup Company. Being a big fan, I've bought them. The funny thing is, there are products that you buy as a student, as a young adult, and then I'm in my mid-30s now, that you continue to buy. But that's one of them I would sort of continue to purchase because somehow it fits in the box of relatively healthy. I enjoy the taste profile. It's quick. It's the convenience thing. So in terms of a customer journey for me, it has been that I have kind of been loyal to it for a while. So how did it all come about? Is there a quick summary of the business case there?
Like all, I've come to understand, like all good things, we're the victim of circumstance, serendipity. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm joking, of course, but the story is very, very straightforward. I was finishing off a master's course in Reading University, and this guy called Andrew, who had the idea. It was Andrew's idea. He came to Reading because it was a centre of excellence for food, Reading University. It's one of the reasons I was there. And he wanted to understand how you could make fresh soup. He had no idea either. He was a stockbroker. And he asked some scientists there. Of course, you're automatically asking the wrong people about an entrepreneurial idea. Because the scientists would go, I'll give you 20 reasons why it won't work.
Yeah.
Go away. But they did say, this Irish guy here finishing off his degree, why don't you talk to him? I actually think they were just trying to get rid of him. And I have no other reason for it. But as luck would have it, I was on campus and met up with Andrew. We went down the pub. It was around lunchtime. And we just kept chatting and talking about it. And we were kicked out at closing time because we spent the whole afternoon, the whole evening, arguing the toss about this. Why would you do that? And an intriguing concept. And well, I think this. And have you ever thought of that? And it just went back and forth and back and forth. And of course, we sat there looking at each other and going, all these questions, we've answered a few of them, but most of them we haven't. And we never will unless we actually do it. So, short circuit for a few more conversations. But that's when we decided, okay, well, let's go and prove to ourselves, but really to everybody, that we can do it, despite what everybody was telling us. And so ultimately, it's really, I suppose, if there's any sort of distillation of advice from that, it's all about having the courage of your convictions.
And how did you find the whole process of dealing with the naysayers, but at the same time, the naysayers could have come from the industry, i.e. buyers and, putting it out in the supermarkets? Was it a quick transition, or was it, you actually, because I presume at that time the whole digital idea of direct to consumer really, wasn't really existing. So how did it come about? Did you have early success with the buyers, or?
Yeah, it was, Mike. It was an overnight success. It took about 10 years. It's so often the case. I mean, back then, of course, I was much younger, so your 10 years goes by very, very quickly. But just picking up on the last point, I suppose it's still relevant to this question: is have the courage of your convictions. It's a bit glib, and sometimes it's so much easier said than done. But when we set up New Covent Garden back in 1987,
wow.
we were told, and you're quite right, we were told by all the experts, or so-called experts, that it would not work. We were told, well, let me tell you this, we were told we would kill somebody. We were told we would kill somebody because the conventional wisdom at the time that liquid soup had to be sterilized. All liquid soup you bought in the store was in a can, and a can is sterilized, it is sterile. So it's heated at huge temperatures to kill everything, to make it sterile. And then, of course, it lasts a very long time. But, of course, we wanted our product to taste of our ingredients, not of a process that was used to give it a long shelf life. So that was the first major change. And then we were told, well, even if you made it, consumers would never find it. I mean, there's a place in the supermarket already. It's called the soup aisle. Why do you need to change things? It works. Don't reinvent the wheel. You don't want to put soup anywhere else other than in the soup aisle because people recognize where it is and they go. And putting it in the chiller, it makes no sense. Why would people expect to see soup in the chiller? And the other thing I remember is they said, and this one I really like, and I've got a sample here. They said, why do you want to put soup in a carton? I mean, soup doesnst belong in a carton. Back then, to be fair, the only thing you'd find in cartons like these was milk, pasteurized milk, and maybe some juice. But the whole thing about it was the consumers loved the fact that the soup was in a carton. Yeah. Consumers loved the fact it was in a chiller for a start because it spoke of freshness. People got it straight away. They said soup in a chiller. Okay, it's a bit weird. Never seen that before, but it must be there for a reason. Always got a short shelf life. It's not like the canned stuff. Always probably fresh. You took it home. Of course, your product needs to deliver against what your brand claims it is doing for you. But they loved it. And they came back and bought it again. So this turned out, in hindsight, of course, to be a stroke of genius by putting a carton, well, certainly fresh soup, into the chiller. And to those guys who said the carton is stupid, and they did say the carton is stupid, consumers loved the carton because it became this aspirational brand. If people start bringing this in this format to the office, they were quite happy to have chilled soup in the office out of a carton. True. People would never do that with a can. The can was naff. You'd never bring a can to the office. And in fact, retailers launched their own fresh soup afterwards because we created the category. But it was really interesting. None of them put their soup in a carton because the carton was already owned by New Covent Garden. The carton was already New Covent Garden Soup Company territory, so to speak. The carton had become synonymous with this brand. So all the other own label, we call it, soup by the main retailers went into plastic tubs and plastic pouches. And so, liquid soup was meant to be in a can, and we were crazy to imagine any other way, but we did imagine it other ways, and the consumer really responded to it. So it was quite difficult, especially for two upstarts who had no knowledge of the food industry or even setting up a business, to imagine we could actually make it work. But I do, coming back to the beginning, I do put this down to having the courage of your convictions. We believe there are enough people out there who are fed up with the quality of canned soup and would pay the premium for a good quality soup in a fresh context. So you need to put the conventional wisdom to one side and understand when you're trying to do something never done before, you got to rely on your own instincts and your own doggedness and just see the project through.
That's very interesting. You said a couple of points about the contrarian belief system that you said, contrary to what the conventional wisdom is of that time. Peter Thiel talks about that he looks for outliers when he's investing, 10 or 15 years, that if everyone else, now experts included, are saying this won't work, he'll be interested in seeing that proposal, because what if this did work for 5, 10, 15 years down the line, this will be the next big thing. Whether you look at Uber or Airbnb and the whole sharing economy in general. But the other point, which I very quickly want to touch upon with you before we go into the next segment, was around the point of owning your own category or owning something, which is from a branding and advertising point of view, I always try and stress upon the client. It's not just about a creative you put out there. What are you going to own in this campaign? What's so cool about, whether it could be the execution, it could be some sort of a connection. In your case, it's you really invented the whole fresh soup kind of category, but putting it in a carton, a stroke of genius in hindsight. But what would you say for other food and drink entrepreneurs out there who struggle to find that? Like, for example, right now I'm talking to a couple of sort of drink entrepreneurs, and gin, for example. Let's take that for example. Is so overly saturated, but it's easy to enter. So, what would you say to them? How can they find something ownable?
It's really interesting when you're generating a new category, really creating a new category and owning it, as you say. I mean, again, it's a there's two sides to that as well. And one is that you've got the whole area to yourself, so you don't have any competition. So it's not like you got to look over your shoulder and see who's coming. They will come if you're successful, and that justifies the fact that you really have a category generated. But you're out there on your own. It's a very lonely place. And okay, you don't have any competition, and you can flail away and do your own thing and be creative and be disruptive and all of that. But you have to, and I use this word very advisedly because it's not a really good word to use, but you have to educate the consumer as to what you're trying to do. Normally you don't educate the consumer. You listen to the consumer. They educate you. But if it's something really new, there's a certain amount of kind of explaining to do. But that's the essence of a brand. The brand is there to do all that explaining for you. It's kind of like you really need to figure out who your target audience are, right? And so many people say, oh, well, take fresh soup. They can say, well, loads of people could eat fresh soup, or take Little Dish. I have a sample here. This happens to be a range of, or one of the range of snack products that we get in Little Dish. But it's kind of saying, well, anybody could consume fresh soup, of course. But who are you actually targeting? Because if you're trying to target everybody, you'd end up targeting nobody. And the point about it is you really need to know who you're targeting. Who's your target market? Once you figure that out, then you design a brand to talk to that audience in a really direct, pithy, succinct way to really convey the benefits of what's inside the package. So your brand is speaking about the benefits. Benefits are, by the way, not just physical benefits, also a lot of emotional benefits wrapped up in a brand. We can all think of brands that we like. Why do we like them? Because there's emotion attached to it. And so really you're conveying a hell of a lot through the brand design, and that is going to be conveying exactly to really landing those messages with that target audience, so they really get it. Because you've got 3 minutes, you've got 3 seconds when you're walking down the aisle doing your shopping. A lot of people, especially in these days, when we're looking at COVID, you got a mask on, you want to get in and get out as quickly as possible. But even in pre-COVID times, people are in there, they don't want to be in there really very long. They've got other things to do. Sure. They've got their list, either a mental list or on their phone or written down, and they got to bang, bang, bang. And some aisles not going to walk down at all, and some they know where they're going for. So you got to grab their attention. So you got to have stand out on shelf. So the brand has an awful lot that it's got to do. There's really a lot expected of it. So really it's a question about getting your brand right, talking to your audience and conveying the benefit of what's inside the carton, or in this case, carton. And then once you get them to take it home, the product's got to deliver, because that's got to make them buy it again, and then you got your repeat purchase. So what you're doing really is you're doing two sides of the same coin. You're generating awareness for your brand to drive trial and get the first purchase, and then you knock their socks off at home when they consume it, or if it's on the go, they consume it straight away, and they say, that was great, I'll buy it again. And then you've got a chance to generate some traction.
That's very interesting. I think that's a pro tip there, in terms of, especially when your resources are so, you're short on resources, time, money in the early days. Just try and be somebody for a niche, and make them really, really happy. Work towards them, build your brand around them, messaging, comms, and then as long as they can be happy, they champion you, and then you move on and you can widen the scope of the offering. But I thought that was really interesting. You also mentioned about the paucity of time when people are going sort of up and down the aisles. It's so true, in terms of the fast moving consumer goods. And I think that very nicely brings me into the next segment, of if there is an entrepreneur who's out there wanting to think about scaling their food or drink brand, It's an extremely daunting task, psychologically and all that. But strategically, how do you even plan to scale a brand that's so new? What do you do within food and drinks?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, and again, the whole experience in New Covent Garden was with a great degree of hindsight, but clearly you go through stages of a very early stage, pre-revenue, concept development, and then launch, and then scale up, and then maturity. And the thing that you mentioned just in that intro was really interesting, because you say, focus on a niche. You can focus on a niche. The problem sometimes with a niche is that it's kind of small. It's limited in terms of its scalability.
Interesting.
And I guess rather than focus on a niche, what I would say is it could be a niche, but don't get me wrong, but it could be focusing on some target group of consumers, in this case, your target audience. Ideally, your target audience, there's a lot of them, or there's a fair number of them. That was one of the problems we had with Little Dish. Little Dish, problem in itself, none really, other than we're targeting kids, toddlers. Yeah, so we're trying to develop a range of products that toddlers would eat. Right. Problem with toddlers is, guess what? They grow up, you lose them. So there's a lot of churn in your consumer base. So you got to constantly be reaching out to new toddlers all the time, or new moms all the time. So getting back to scaling really is really interesting. So first of all, if you can target a group, so there's lots of them, so that you can scale. So there's not a huge challenge trying to find more and more of these people that really, really buy into your brand and buy into your product. Yeah. And then it's a question about how you actually physically scale a business. And I think in FMCG, you very, very definitely, if you have ambition and you want to grow this business and potentially exit it, and by the way, that's what I've done in all my businesses is kind of create, grow, mature, exit, I suppose, would be the phases. You don't necessarily have to exit. You can build a lifestyle business. You can build a business you want to hand on to your family. You can do all that. It's just not what I've done. But if you're looking at exiting, it means you have to have a pretty aggressive growth ambition. And to do that, you need to invest ahead of the curve. Now, investing ahead of the curve, what does that mean? It really means investing money to grow your brand, much more money than your business is throwing off in the short term. So that's why you need to go to the market and raise finance. But before you do that, I think it's critical to go through a bootstrapping phase and conserve as much money as you possibly can on understanding your target market. It comes back to everything you do ever in FMCG is really understanding your target market. And so when, after a period of time, let's say it's 12 or 18 months, you really understand your target market, you've launched your product, you've got a bit of feedback, you begin to meet consumers. And this is for a direct-to-consumer is really, really good, because you can that shelf that you put your products on in a retailer, it's great.
Sure.
Because the consumer comes in and buys it off the shelf, but it gets in the way of you and the consumer. And going direct to consumer, as the name would say, or a subscription model, is a great way to get to know your consumer really well. The point is, though, you build up what I call a marketing playbook. You begin to understand what really works with your consumer base. It really works in terms of generating the awareness for this brand that I described before. So you know your target audience, you developed a brand, and you've got all these things you can do to generate awareness for your brand. You can waste an awful lot of money just piling in with a lot of money if you had it, and spending because you think this will work and this will work and this will work. Don't. Test it. And then when you're ready, having bootstrapped your business, you will really know what works and really know what doesn't work. And that's the time to raise money, because you can you can indicate at least to an investor, you give me £1 million and I know exactly what I would spend it on, and I pretty much know what sort of return I get for it. An investor will love that approach.
That's interesting. You spoke about bootstrapping and sort of, finding your target audience and developing a brand around that. And you said that discovery of that target audience could be a process of feedback loops that either you run or the market will give to you. I meet a lot of sort of entrepreneurs, and they kind of lose hope during this phase, because that's the phase of uncertainty. It's just pre-revenue. It might even be their own money or their family money or friends, and they feel very they feel very disheartened when they get a couple of initial bad reviews, or the packaging is not correct, or it doesn't just taste right as we were expecting. What advice would you give them? What's the point where they need to kind of believe in themselves and go, okay, I need to have a big order come in and I need to start making B2B sales and let's start moving that direction? Or what do they need to do to try and win that little sort of black hole?
That's a great question, and it really depends on every business is different. But I think if from a general point of view or a general context, what I've learned is stick to the knitting, focus on something that is really going to make a difference. And in my experience, it's always been really understand the consumer. I'm going to sound like a track record here because in FMCG in particular, but I actually think in any business, in FMCG, we talk about consumers. In any business, you talk about customers, whether it's a product or a service. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's really understanding what your customers' needs are. And a lot of the time, entrepreneurs set up businesses because, they're fed up because this thing doesn't exist. Yep. And if only this was there and I can't find it. And how come nobody's done this? And I'm really frustrated. And I'll just do it myself. And that's great because you really understand the consumer need. And there is a really clear consumer need. Two watch-outs, though. Make sure there's enough people out there with that same need already in terms of scalability. But also make sure that you can get your arms around that particular consumer need and really understand what it means to them as opposed to what it means to you. There's a great danger sometimes that entrepreneurs, sort of set their own business up because of their need that they've identified, and they carry on for years selling to themselves because they know the market, because guess what? They are their own best customer. But actually, they've never really dug into what the customer really wants. They've never really asked the customer. They've kind of assumed, because they're their own customer, what the consumer wants. And they might have got it wrong, or the markets move very, very quickly and evolve very quickly. And they really need to keep on top of what the consumer is expecting or what the competition is doing and maybe offering something similar or better. You need to be one step ahead. That's where innovation comes from. So, a lot there, but I think, if you're struggling and there's a lot of uncertainty and will it ever work, it's go back to the consumer and ask them what they want and be really clear what they want and drill down and physically go and see them. Or go into retailer outlets and hang around and see when people go to the store and go to the shop and pull your product off the shelf and look at it and maybe put it back, inquire why, what, and all the rest. All those little pieces of information. It's so crucial to build up an uncluttered and unbiased view of what the consumer really wants. I remember just very quickly one story about when we went to do focus groups very early on, pre-revenue in Little Dish. And it was an amazing revelation of, a whole array of mothers with young children. To just sit there, I'm clearly not a mother. And I couldn't put myself in their shoes, although I tried and did a reasonably good job, but never put myself in their shoes to understand what it's like to raise kids at that age and the struggles of getting them to eat properly and healthfully and in a convenient way and stuff they will like, they will taste. But go and speak to consumers. And we had a range of moms over 3 or 4 days, different age groups, different demographic backgrounds. And really, it was revelation. We began to understand, oh my word, that. Somebody stood up at one of them and said, with a jar, the old-fashioned jars of baby food, and said, I can't believe this. This food is older than my baby. That was a penny drop moment, because it had such a long shelf life. It was older. The shelf life was longer than her baby was. And we kind of thought, it's all about freshness, it's all about a whole bunch of things, but it's all about what Little Dish is going to convey to the consumer. And that is priceless. Understanding that consumer drive, consumer need is priceless, but keep it up to date.
That's interesting. And you touched upon the uncertainty turning into a competitive advantage, and you've done that repeatedly at all your ventures, and you also train other entrepreneurs now to try and help them do that. Is there a framework you operate within that?
I mean, framework, I think, would be too rigid a way to describe it. I guess what I'm asked these days a lot is but does it still ring true? Does it still hold? In other words, should businesses, should entrepreneurs set up their business now, given the uncertainty we're in right now?
Yeah.
And my view is, entrepreneurs are all about seeking the advantage and seeking the opportunity that lies in uncertainty. And in fact, I think in answer to that question is, there's never been a better time to set up a business, given where we are right now with uncertainty. Clearly depends on your industry and depends on your category. But, like I say, entrepreneurs are really good at identifying opportunity and uncertainty and turning that uncertainty into competitive advantage. And currently we're almost defined by uncertainty. I used to talk about this 2 or 3 years ago in the context, in a UK and an EU context about Brexit. Brexit was a hugely uncertain time. Is it going to happen? Is it not? Then it is, but what's it going to look like? We're still, I think, there. And so it hasn't gone away, but now it's in the shadow of this huge global pandemic. And we're sort of coming out of it, but with, bleary-eyed out of hibernation. You're not quite sure what's going to happen next. And the big issue is getting consumer or customer confidence back. The government is opening up and allowing lockdown restrictions to occur, but people have to be convinced that it's safe to go out and mingle in the public again and do things like they did before. But the point about it is uncertainty leads to change. And while there's lots of change going on now, the last 4 months of lockdown were very sudden change.
Correct.
For all industries and all countries, all together. Normally change happens at a slightly less frenetic pace, and different industries are moving at different stages, and people are kind of figuring out trends. This was accelerated. And while people are really looking forward to returning to their routines and to their favorites, there's got to be some degree of what I call of stickability in their behavior. So people will take some of the experiences with them from the last 3 or 4 months of lockdown, and that will inform, I think, their ongoing consumer behavior coming out of this and into the back end of the year and into 2021. People are purchasing online a lot more. People are working from home. People are doing web conferencing. People are traveling less, especially for business. Do we need all these offices in the center of town anymore? I think, there'll be an influence on the types of homes that people want to live in the future. If one of their rooms is always going to be an office, that kind of thing. But, the smart entrepreneurs will observe these sort of changes. And I think they'll do their best to position their businesses or pivot their existing businesses to be at the front of the pack, to capitalize on this shift in consumer behavior.
I completely agree.
It may only be a 5% change, but if everybody's making that change, then that's a big market. And also the other point, Mike, just before we drop it, is the competitive advantage piece. It's really important to underline competitive advantage, because you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be better than your competition, who haven't figured this bit out yet, and they're still trying to make their outdated business model work, or a business model that was more suited to pre-COVID times. So I think there's an opportunity. There's always an opportunity for an entrepreneur because of uncertainty. But right now, there's so much uncertainty. There's a huge opportunity for an entrepreneur who's smart about approaching it.
It's interesting that we have spoken a lot about sort of starting out. And I truly appreciate your opinion on sort of utilizing this uncertainty in the best way possible. And I think that is what hope is all about, hope as a society, but hope as, in business world, because whether we like it or not, business is what drives pretty much everything around the world. But talking about that, I'm also very interested about talking about exits. And I want to find out from you, is there a right time to exit from your business? I know you have done many exits. So what is your formula, if there is one, if there is none, then how do you find it?
Oh, that is a real sort of subjective question. In my experience, when you ask that question, the answer is, it's just gone by. If only I knew. If only I knew. It was 6 months ago. Brilliant. Look at what's happened since then. Maybe people will say that about COVID or whatever, but there will be a new dawn and people will come back from that, no question. And yes, I have exited a few. 2 of my 3 businesses exited successfully. The middle business in the States, unfortunately, didn't work. But again, back to one of the earlier questions, it was a great learning experience. So I have had 2 successful exits, and we actually tried to exit the middle one as well. And then more recently, lots of businesses I'm involved with have gone through exits too. Very quickly, from my industry point of view, FMCG or food and drink in particular, it's all about building revenue. It's all about really building revenue. It's not so critical, and I say this advisedly, it's not so critical to build profitability. That will come with time. It's all about building revenue. It's kind of like a land grab of distribution. If you think about all the new categories that have built up over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
So true.
Think of popcorn 8 years ago. It didn't really exist that much. Now there's there are a huge range. Think of popcorn products and other bagged snacks out there, all competing for the same space. Think of snack bars, healthy bars, huge range of products, all competing for space, all I think with very, very similar USPs. Mm-hmm. So the consumer is bombarded with this range of products. But sometimes they're having difficulty figuring out what the differences are between different brands. So really, it's a question to get out there, get ahead of that pack, and do it quickly, and build a loyal following, and take the premium position, and really drive it. And there's always a tendency to say, "Oh, I don't want to sell too soon because I'm going to leave money on the table." That's always a risk. But a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, I think, is what I'd say. So if you get a sensible offer, the competition is coming hard and fast. What does all that mean in reality? It very much depends on where you are. Covent Garden took us 10 years to sell. Little Dish took us 11. So we all went into this, certainly in Covent Garden, with the belief we'd be in and out in 5 years. Everybody says that, by the way. Nobody ever does it, unless there's an exception. And of course, 10 years isn't that long either, really, from in terms of beginning to end. The other thing is, don't try to be known for some really good things. So become known for delivering and implementing certain things really well. Don't try to do everything. Because you won't, and you become diluted, and you won't have a focus. And I think sometimes you can do certain things to demonstrate there's a market out there. Like, for example, New Covent Garden, we thought there's a market in continental Europe. Let's go and do that. But then we kind of thought, to do that properly, you need a lot of money, and you need a bit of time. And we were kind of ready to sell the business around then anyway. And we thought, do we want to go all this way? So what we did was we just did a little bit of a trial in France and Belgium and Holland, some really good stores there. The rest of Europe is much different to the UK and Ireland in terms of consumer base and store structure. So we're kind of thinking we have to learn a whole new business model there, a certain distribution model, a route to market. But we tested it a little bit and demonstrated the opportunity, and then stopped, and then sold our business. So what we were doing was selling our business in the UK and Ireland, pretty solid, and then demonstrating an opportunity that's out here, which is in continental Europe, but not actually doing it, full-blooded doing it. Because the risk is you mess it up. The risk is you kind of don't do it right, and you get distracted, and you let your UK business slip, maybe. There's a whole bunch of risks there. And if you don't do it right, what do you prove? You prove actually maybe there isn't such a big market in Europe. So you kind of say, okay, well, I think we've tested enough to be able to demonstrate there's an opportunity here, but we're going to say to a larger corporation, you come in with your marketing knowledge and your marketing dollars and put money behind this, but we want tomorrow's price today because we've demonstrated that there's an opportunity.
I love it.
And that's a way to maximize value without taking too many more risks, especially if you're 8, 9, 10 years in.
That's very interesting. I think to wrap it up, one final question. I've heard you speak in some of your videos that you kindly give out as your learnings to many people. You also do a lot of speaking now, which is fantastic. I really wanted to find out, in one of the videos, and I've written it down, you mentioned something around get out of the way of your own success. I find that is a very fascinating thing to say. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've recognized this in hindsight. There's so many learnings I've learned about my own experience, my direct experience in hindsight. But I've seen this being mirrored in lots of other entrepreneurs as well. And I think the message is that you really need to recognize when you need to get out of the way of your own success. And as entrepreneurs, I think, both myself during the 3 businesses I set up and other entrepreneurs in business that I'm involved with, either as an investor or as an advisor, they kind of, you set up and grow a business, and we all need to do that properly. We need to have a bit of an ego, frankly. If for no other reason, just to withstand the constant barrage of knockbacks and setbacks and people lining up to tell you that you're wrong. Back to New Covent Garden, for example, all the things we were told would never work. And I guess, in effect, that's really how you deal with adversity. You have to have a thick skin. But at a certain point, you can then get along, I don't know, maybe it's 12 months in or 18 months in or 24 months in, and you can get to that point and you can, with great justification and legitimately, look back and say, I've achieved a lot. I've got us to where we are, and I've done it all on my own. Because it's probably only you or maybe a handful of people, but you're the entrepreneur, you're driving it. Maybe you've done it with somebody else as a co-founder, but I've got to here all because of me. And that's fine, and it's true. But the big mistake that people make is to think that they can carry on doing it like that, because they've proven this works up to now, ultimately doing everything yourself or taking all the main decisions yourself. The problem with that is you become the bottleneck, and you're also restricting the growth potential of your own business to your own ability. And that's a really stupid place to be. You clearly can't be good at everything. And even if you were, then there's only 24 hours in a day anyway. So how can you do everything? So you need to be smart, I think, and recognize that there's a tipping point somewhere, and you will know. It's not the same for every business, but you will know in your business. And you need to begin to develop a team. You need to bring individuals into your business who are better than you are in various disciplines. And you need to move from doing everything to doing less, and then doing more stuff like providing direction and motivating and providing inspiration. And if you hire a bunch of, if you hire a bunch of self-starters and let them at it, then guess what they're going to do? They're going to self-start, but they're going to self-start in this direction.
Correct.
In other words, no direction. And it's your job, I think, to make sure that the boat goes faster, obviously, but clearly in the right direction, and that we're all pulling together in this same direction. Now figuring this out and figuring it out at the right time for your business is a great skill. But I've noticed that entrepreneurs often have a blind spot regarding this, and I certainly did myself. But luckily I figured it out before it was too late, I guess, and I did manage to get out of the way of my own business and delegate effectively and make sure we could grow effectively.
I think that was a great piece of advice. I find that especially the race in the tech startup scene is enormous, and that piece of advice is hugely valuable in that space, not just in the food and drinks category. But I truly enjoyed talking to you, John. There's so much more to add, and I'm sure we'll do a part 2 in a few months. I'll find another couple of topics, but I hope the viewers will enjoy what you said, more from a person who has done it and done it consistently, but also now helping other people to do it. So, and if they need to find you, how can they find you? Is there a website or an email?
Yeah, listen, getting a hold of me is really straightforward. The easiest way is like through my email and my website are very, very similar. So I give you my both. It's www.johnstapleton.eu, just my name.eu, and my website is john@stapleton.eu.
Brilliant.
So yeah, listen, just go on my website. There's a little bit there about some of the stuff that we talked about today and others besides. But yeah, listen, if anyone wants to get hold of me for any reason, look me up on LinkedIn as well or whatever, and do a DM through that route. That's fine. So listen, I hope I've answered all your questions appropriately. I hope it all made sense. I'm sure we've overrun on time, but ask an Irishman to spend 20 minutes talking about something and he'll take 40. So that's just the way it is.
I really enjoyed it, and I thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. Thanks, John. Speak soon. Bye.
More than welcome.
Bye.
Cheerio,
Take care, mate.